All right, well, we can get started. Everybody ready? All right. Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to say a few words in French before I switch to English for the rest of the evening. Alors, bonsoir. Je m'appelle Jennifer Bimen et je suis la directrice de l'organisme Action Cancer du Sein du Québec. Et nous sommes très heureuses que vous soyez avec nous ce soir. Action Cancer du Sein est une organisation exceptionnelle vouée à la prévention du cancer du sein. Et cette table ronde vous donnera l'occasion de voir et participer à une discussion avec des femmes exceptionnelles sur certaines problématiques qui nous préoccupent beaucoup, et ce depuis 30 ans. Alors, normalement, un événement comme celui-ci, pour nous, devrait être bilingue, mais exceptionnellement, nous avons un panel entièrement en anglais. Alors, nous offrons la traduction simultanée en français. Il suffit de cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation et de choisir le français comme langue d'interprétation. Alors, même si la discussion est en anglais, n'hésitez pas à écrire vos questions ou commentaires en français dans la section questions-réponses. Alors, à partir d'ici, pour les traductrices, je dois parler exclusivement en anglais. Alors, merci et bonne table ronde. Hi, I'm Jennifer Beeman, Director of Breast Cancer Action Quebec, and we are so happy to welcome you to our 30th anniversary celebration of this unique organization whose mission is breast cancer prevention. With this roundtable of exceptional women, we highlight some of the major issues that have been at the heart of our work for 3 decades. For 30 years, we have been challenging systems that cause serious harm. So many women have brought this organization to where it is today, some of whom we've lost too early. To all the women and all the people who have supported us, many of you over many years, through membership, volunteer work, donations, and more, we can't thank you enough. This is a collective enterprise. This is your organization, and it's only together that we can continue to make real strides forward. Before going further, we would like to begin by acknowledging that most of us at Breast Cancer Action Quebec are living and working on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyan-Gehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the water and lands on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it's home of a diverse population of Indigenous and other people. The community of Kanesatake of the Ganyan-Gehaga Nation is facing a serious problem of environmental racism with an illegal dump that is releasing toxic chemicals. And both the federal and provincial governments are refusing to intervene, each saying that the other group is responsible. The community has mobilized and has created a collective letter that groups can sign on to in solidarity with the community. If you are a member of a formal group, we strongly urge you to have your group sign on. There is also a petition that individuals can sign, but the community at this point is really looking for group support for its sign-on letter. So we will put the links to the campaign in the chat, and just would like to underscore that reconciliation is not about land acknowledgements, although that is the beginning. They are about settler actions. So your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you. And now, I would like to introduce our moderator for the roundtable, Maguy Métellus. She is an exceptional woman who sent me a very laconic biography that I don't think does justice to her contributions to the cultural milieu in Quebec, to feminism, and for human rights, among many other things. But I will respect what she sent, and so tell you that Maguy Métellus is a Haitiano-Québécoise mother, grandmother, Black feminist and human rights advocate. She is a sought-after moderator and considered by many to be the hostess with the mostest, of which I have no doubt. Maguy, thank you so much for being a part of this evening. And now, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the warm introduction, and thank you for not going into it too much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Greetings to all. Happy 30th. And continued success to Breast Cancer Action Quebec. I am truly honored to be moderating this most important conversation and with such esteemed guests whose work involves asking critical questions of the breast cancer movement. We are thrilled to welcome Sharima Rasanayagam, Director of Science at Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, Greetings, Sharima. Samantha King, author of Pink Ribbons, Inc. Greetings, Samantha. Kimiko Tobimatsu, co-author of Kimiko Does Cancer. Greetings, Kimiko. And Patricia Kearns, breast cancer activist and screenwriter of Pink Ribbons, Inc. Greetings, Patricia. The format of the conversation is a 5-8-minute presentation by each panelist, followed by questions and exchange. You, the public, are invited to send questions through the Q&A feature of the platform, and we will take them after the segment. The film Pink Ribbons, Inc., based on the book of the same title by Samantha King, served as a launch pad for the roundtable. The film explores the dark side of the pink ribbon industry and includes many voices who speak to the fact that breast cancer is a devastating disease that cannot be reduced to a pink ribbon. We begin our conversation with Dr. Sharima Rasanayagam. As Breast Cancer Prevention Partners Director of Science, Dr. Sharima Rasanayagam works to ensure that the organization continues to be a national leader in science-based environmental health advocacy. She oversees all of the organization's science-related activities, including monitoring and interpreting emerging scientific research, representing the organization in key scientific bodies, developing and managing science-related program and policy initiatives, and providing scientific guidance on the development of new programmatic initiatives. Before coming to BCPP, Sharima was the founding academic coordinator at the UC Berkeley Institute for the Environment, where she built the institute from the ground up. Previously, she served as counsel for science and technology at the UK Consulate General in San Francisco, where she built collaborative research and business ties between scientists in the UK and California. Sharima holds a PhD in microbiology from the University of Kent at Canterbury, UK. Welcome again, Sharima.
Thank you so much, Maggie. So really honored to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. So as Maggie said, I'm Sharima Rasanayagam. I'm the Director of Science at Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, and I've been asked today to talk to you a little bit about toxics, environmental racism, and breast cancer. So BCPP, Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, is a US science-based advocacy organization focused on preventing breast cancer by eliminating our exposures to toxic chemicals and radiation linked to the disease. And as I'm sure you all know, 1 in 8 women in the US and Canada will be diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime. And only around 10% of those diagnoses can be linked to known genetic factors. So at BCPP, we have long been concerned with how environmental exposures are contributing to these rates. We're concerned with chemicals that have been found to cause cancer, these are carcinogens, but also with endocrine disrupting chemicals, those that affect our hormone system, because breast cancer is known to be driven by our natural hormones, and chemicals that mimic those hormones or affect our body's response to them can also increase our risk. And these chemicals are found all around us, in our air, soil, water, in our food, in our personal care products, in our homes, workplaces, and public spaces. Of course, not everyone who has the same exposures will experience the same outcomes. Timing of exposure matters. So we're concerned about exposures throughout our lives, but especially at those periods of increased vulnerability when our breast tissue is developing and changing it rapidly. So prenatally, when we're developing in the womb, during childhood and adolescence, during puberty, during pregnancy, and also the menopause. Interactions also matter. Some women will react differently to the same exposure, depending on what their underlying genetic susceptibility is or what else they're exposed to, whether that be other chemicals or physical or social stresses. There's more and more evidence on how stress is affecting our health outcomes. Mixtures and low doses matter. So we hear a lot especially from companies, that the levels of these chemicals are very low in any product, so there's nothing to worry about. But exposures add up. We live in a soup of chemicals. We can be exposed to the same chemical many times in many products, or to chemical mixtures which may interact and act synergistically. And with chemicals that affect our hormone system, even really low levels of exposure can have profound effects, sometimes even more than higher levels. But what about the impact on marginalized communities? Well, over the last 10 years, more and more evidence of the disparities in exposures experienced by marginalized communities have come to light. At BCPP, we spent the last 4 years taking a systemic view of exposures linked to breast cancer in California in a report which we call Paths to Prevention, which is available on our website, bcpp.org. I'll put that in the chat later. So science tells us that Black women in particular face both disproportionate exposure to breast carcinogens and the highest risk of serious health impacts from the disease. Though the rates of breast cancer incidence in US Black women is now similar to those of white women, Black women are more likely to die of the disease. So Black women in the US have a 31% breast cancer mortality rate, and this is the highest of any US racial or ethnic group. And they're more likely to be diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer, which is the most aggressive subtype and most difficult to treat. In our report, we found that social inequity in the form of institutionalized racism may affect the risk of this hormone receptor negative breast cancer. There is evidence that Black women born in the Jim Crow states that had exclusion of Black people from society have a 41% higher risk of ER negative breast cancer than Black women born in other US states. So it's the specific experiences that seem to be affecting rates. And environmental racism plays a role. And when I say environmental racism, I mean the disproportionate presence of heavy industry and waste close to Black, brown, and indigenous communities. These place-based chemical exposures disproportionately affect these already overburdened populations. The same Black and brown communities that lack access to clean water, who live in intentionally food-deprived areas, or lack safe spaces for physical activity, are also likely to work and live in areas of potentially toxic industries. There was a recent study by George Washington University in Washington, DC, that found neighborhoods historically populated by residents of color have higher amounts of fine particle pollution and higher rates of disease. So that's air pollution. So the lead researchers commented that there's a large and growing body of evidence that makes clear that air pollution hits disadvantaged communities harder because people in these communities are more likely to breathe polluted air, and because baseline health disparities make exposure to pollution especially harmful. And I just read an article in The Guardian about how here in Canada, the Aamjiwnaang First Nation in Ontario has finally got access to data showing that the levels of benzene, and this is a carcinogen specifically linked to breast cancer, so that the benzene levels in its air are 44 times higher than is considered safe. This First Nation is surrounded on all sides by petrochemical facilities, and members have long suspected that they've been exposed to dangerous substances, and it now appears that the provincial government knew this and did not act. Besides these place-based exposures, another major risk factor, which is something that Pink Ribbons Inc. talked about, was chemicals in consumer products. In the US, companies can legally use chemicals linked to cancer, birth defects, and other serious health harm in cosmetics products that are used every day by consumers and workers. And Black women are disproportionately affected. Black women in the US spend nearly $9 billion each year on beauty products and use more beauty products per capita than any other demographic. This is partly for cultural reasons, but also because of their need to conform to racialized beauty standards, what has been referred to as the environmental injustice of beauty. Recent studies and product testing show chemicals linked to serious health harms in the beauty products marketed to Black women. This includes chemicals linked to breast and ovarian cancer, to uterine fibroids, endometriosis, and other health concerns that Black women are particularly concerned about. Black women and other women of color suffer from a higher level of exposure to unsafe chemicals from their beauty products than white women because the products themselves are toxic, and the ones that are marketed to them. And this includes hair dyes, hair relaxers and straighteners, skin lighteners, feminine douches, deodorant, and others. In fact, at BCPP, we conducted product testing quite recently, and out of the 25 personal care and beauty products we tested, the product with the most toxic chemicals was a children's shampoo marketed to kids of color in a hair relaxing kit, and it was called Just For Me. And this shampoo had more toxic chemicals than a tub and tile cleaner that we tested. And only last year, the National Institute of Environmental Health Studies in the US did a study that showed that Black women who frequently dye their hair have a 60% increased risk of breast cancer compared to white women. In the report that I mentioned, Paths to Prevention, we not only summarized the science linking exposures to breast cancer, but we also recommended over 300 interventions which could decrease the risk of breast cancer in the state of California and beyond. And we've been working on a number of these, which you can find on our website, and we think it can go beyond California, and we're hoping people will follow some of these recommendations. But on our website, you can see what we've been doing, and this includes market actions against Johnson & Johnson for their asbestos-contaminated talc sales, which they have officially stopped in North America, but you can still buy this talc everywhere in the world. And also we found it is available in New York in some of the dollar stores and online. We have also worked to get PFAS, perfluorinated chemicals, out of firefighting foam and food packaging. And we currently have a US federal Safer Beauty bill package. This is a suite of 4 new bills to try and make beauty and personal care products safer for all. And you can find out all about this on our website. We're also continuing to work in California to implement the recommendations we made in Paths to Prevention and to reduce exposures linked to breast cancer in communities' local environment in California. So as I said, please find out more by visiting bcpp.org, and I'm looking forward to speaking more today on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharima, and we look forward to hearing more from you during the question period. We now turn to Samantha King. Samantha King is a professor in the School of Kinesiology and Health Studies and the Department of Gender Studies at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. Samantha's research and teaching focus on the social dimensions of health, food, and the body. Her book, Pink Ribbons, Inc., Breast Cancer and the Politics of Philanthropy, was the basis for the film by the same name. With Gavin Whedon, her current work explores the emergence of protein as an ubernutrient. Welcome again, Samantha. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be here. I'm going to just revisit a little bit of the history of the pink ribbon and the corporate breast cancer movement, and then talk a little bit about how I think things might have shifted since the film was made and in the last few years. And maybe we'll get to talk more about that in the Q&A too. So when I first began writing about the corporatization of breast cancer over 2 decades ago, I thought it was a fad that would soon diminish. It probably goes without saying that I could not have been more wrong. The interest not only lasted, but grew and developed in ways that were unimaginable back in 1998 when I drafted the first pages of Pink Ribbons, Inc. The boom years, which I would suggest occurred between 2000 and 2010, was something to behold, with a non-stop procession of products with a breast cancer theme appearing in the marketplace. From propane gas to fishing tackle, from toilet paper to pre-sliced mushrooms, and from automobiles to oil wells, the possibilities for branding through breast cancer seemed endless. Simultaneously, splashy fundraising events with costly overheads flourished. From the CIBC Run for the Cure to the Avon Weekend to End Breast Cancer, from the Moonwalk to the Tour de Pink, the public was offered an almost endless array of options through which to raise funds. And then there were the iconic landmarks, such as the Empire State Building and the Burj Al Arab Hotel, illuminated in pink lights, a campaign that continued in 2021 with Niagara Falls, the Eiffel Tower, and the White House, just some of the places lit up during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. At the same time, governments encouraged consumer-oriented philanthropic responses to the disease. The Breast Cancer Quarter, launched by the Royal Canadian Mint in 2006, was only the second colored coin in the country's history and the first to be dedicated to a specific disease. The coin was circulated exclusively through Shoppers Drug Mart, which, as an aside, I was thinking today sounds like rapid antigen tests as well. For folks in Ontario anyway, that's been a big issue in the news this week. Taken together, these corporate marketing strategies, mass participation fundraising events, and government policies work to construct the disease as an individual challenge that could be overcome by shopping, exercising, and what Ellen Leopold calls a tidal waves approach to research funding, whereby we act as if a disease can be overwhelmed by simply throwing money at it. Closely linked to this history is a transformation in the meaning of breast cancer from a stigmatized disease, an individual tragedy best dealt with privately and in isolation, to a neglected epidemic worthy of public debate and political organizing, to an enriching and affirming experience during which women with breast cancer, people with breast cancer, are rarely patients and mostly survivors. In the latter of these three configurations, the breast cancer survivor emerged as an archetypal hero who, through her courage and vitality, elicited an outpouring of individual and corporate generosity, a continued supply of which, we were led to believe, will ensure that the fight against the disease remains an unqualified success. Moreover, the image of the woman with breast cancer that emerged with the pink ribbon industry, youthful, ultra-feminine, cisgender, slim, light-skinned, if not white, radiant with health, joyful, proud, and so on, left little room for recognition that people still die of the disease, that not all are in a position to live a restitution narrative, or that happiness and individual striving cannot protect us from disease. In 1980, in a moment of remarkable foresight, Audre Lorde, the Black American poet, warned women against the dangers of becoming overly optimistic in their political and personal struggles against breast cancer. She could probably not have envisaged that 3 decades after she penned the cancer journals, corporations large and small would be clamoring to tie their names to the disease, taking advantage of the destigmatizing work of early activists and newly enthralled with cause-related marketing as a way to sell products to women. Nor would she have likely imagined that they would spend millions of dollars identifying and packaging the next product to be stamped with a pink ribbon. Nor, given Lorde's concerns about the links between environmental contaminants and breast cancer, might she have foreseen that it is often the corporations responsible for selling products most closely linked to deaths from cancer that have been most successful in linking their brand image to the disease. Under the tyranny of cheerfulness that infused the marketing of these items, it became hard to think about breast cancer as an injustice to rally against, rather than an enriching and affirming experience. This doesn't mean that the conceptualization of breast cancer as a political issue dropped out of public circulation, as everyone here knows very well, or that residual discourses of stigmatization were entirely displaced. Rather, personal strength and optimism on the part of breast cancer survivors, alongside the breast cancer awareness and research money that is generated by practices of consumer-oriented philanthropy, became widely understood as the most effective tools for fighting the battle against the disease. It wasn't until 2012, right around the time that Pink Ribbons, the film, was released, that the ribbon began to lose its luster. Already by that point, there was rising concern reflected in a barrage of critical media articles each October about the motivations and consequences of the pink ribbon industry. So around that time, I was really inundated, and I think other people who write about this issue and think about this issue and organize around this issue had the same experience. There was just a lot of interest in more critical perspectives. Then in February 2012, it emerged that at that point, iconic Komen Foundation, which was the largest private funder of breast cancer in the world at that time, had bowed to pressure from anti-abortion activists to stop most of its funding to Planned Parenthood, which many of you probably know is a US nonprofit healthcare provider that also offers abortion services. The outpouring of concern over this decision, which it turns out rested on just $100,000. That's what the Komen Foundation gave Planned Parenthood every year, which is a drop in the bucket of Komen funding and also of Planned Parenthood's operating budget. But the outpouring of concern over this decision was swift, forceful, and to the minds of many commentators, like nothing they had ever seen before in terms of social media mobilized activism. Komen's decision was frequently described as a betrayal of their mission, of the millions of Americans who raced for the cure every year, and of the people who Komen and Planned Parenthood serve. Described by the LA Times as one of the great PR faux pas of the decade, this event resulted in a loss of $77 million and now serves for the Komen Foundation, and now serves as a case study for students in business schools across the US and in fact beyond, learning how to avoid PR disasters. But to people familiar with the history of the foundation and its agenda, the decision gave little cause for surprise. For this was not simply a public relations mishap, but reflective of a distinctly conservative agenda shaped over the course of 3 decades and undergirding the perky pink ribbon culture at the center of their brand. There were ramifications in Canada too. Although the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation, which was modeled from Komen, on Komen from its inception, and that's of course something I learned from Sharon Batt's book. Sharon was, I think, one of the original members of Breast Cancer Action Quebec, then Montreal. So the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation was modeled on Komen from the beginning. They had very close ties with them. They acted very swiftly to try and distance themselves from Komen in the wake of the Planned Parenthood debacle. But it turns out they had a memorandum of agreement with Komen to raise funds and explore possibilities to partner in research, education, advocacy, and awareness programs. This debacle, alongside the increasingly cutthroat competitiveness of the charitable sector, the rising cost of living, growing skepticism of traditional philanthropic institutions, especially among the young, and I would say kick-ass anti-corporate activism has meant that the pink ribbon has definitely lost its luster, but problems associated with a commodified philanthropic approach to the disease persist. We can look to the recent history of the Canadian Cancer Society as one example.
Samantha?
In 2017,
I'm sorry, dear. Could we maybe go into that in the?
Oh yeah, that's
Is that
good.
okay?
That's just my last page.
Okay. Sorry?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, welcome back to you. Thank you, Samantha. We will now hear from Kimiko Tobimatsu. Kimiko Tobimatsu is the author of Kimiko Does Cancer, a graphic memoir about her experience navigating breast cancer as a, I'm sorry, I didn't turn my video on, as a young, queer, mixed-race woman. By day, Kimiko is an employment and human rights lawyer, as well as owner of Kimiko & Co., an online greeting card and stationery business. Kimiko Does Cancer is her first book. Welcome again, Kimiko.
Thank you. My dog is trying to dig a hole in the ground, so if you hear some scratching in the background, hopefully you can still hear me okay. But Maggie, just flag if the noise you think is too loud. So yeah, I'm so happy to be here and that I was invited to participate in this discussion. Even just in watching the film, which I hadn't seen before, and preparing for this panel, I learned a lot about the breast cancer activists that have been doing this work and fighting this fight for a very long time, and I'm so appreciative of all of your commitment. I'm fairly new to this breast cancer world, maybe a little less new now. I got diagnosed with breast cancer, there's the dog, almost 7 years ago when I was 25. My cancer was estrogen receptor positive, and so I've been on hormone therapy as a preventative measure ever since. But even before I got breast cancer, I was turned off by the whole pink ribbon culture, but it was a bit more of a distanced irritation. I looked at it as, just another example of insidious capitalism. But when I got breast cancer, suddenly, those people were supposed to be my people. And so, it affected me in a much different way. Many of my issues with pink ribbon culture are the same as those highlighted in the film. The corporatization of the movement, as Samantha King spoke about, the hypocritical alliances, the silencing of systemic issues, as Sharima spoke about. There's so many cringeworthy moments in the film, and I hate that Mustang commercial. Yeah, it's pretty shocking to see now. But in addition to these types of issues, I think the other reason that the pink ribbon culture is so irritating to me on a personal level is also because it is so straight and so traditionally gendered. And the focus very much is on cis women, and the recognition that cis men also get breast cancer. That's kind of the extent of so-called inclusion. It's women and men, but there is very little recognition of the experiences of trans, non-binary, queer, and gender non-conforming folks who also get breast cancer. And these experiences aren't talked about as a distinct issue. There are some organizations, like this one, that are working to highlight more diverse experiences, but the mainstream discourse remains quite homogeneous. And this creates, of course, a problem of representation. We don't get to see ourselves in the mainstream images of who gets cancer. If that was an actual fact, we don't get cancer, that's great, but we do get cancer. And so, not to be able to then see ourselves in those images is very isolating. It also creates a lack of understanding and minimal research about the distinct ways that breast cancer affects us on a physical and on an emotional level. There's little acknowledgement that we might need different approaches to support and to medical care. Of course, the pink ribbon culture, it doesn't only infiltrate popular discourse, but it also comes into play in medical discourse and practice. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, the surgical decisions that were, or options that were being offered to me were based on a very particular idea of femininity and gender presentation. And, the most obvious way is an assumption around if you get any kind of, breast surgery, whether partial or full removal, that reconstruction is assumed. But, that's not the case that everybody wants to get that, either for gender-based reasons or simply because they don't want to get another surgery. But there's very much the assumption with one comes the other. And it's, not solely the fault of the pink ribbon culture that we have these ideas about appropriate gender presentation, but certainly pink ribbon culture builds upon and reinforces these very traditional ideas. And so for those who don't fit the mold, it's an alienating feeling. And it also necessitates a different level of self-advocacy when navigating medical decisions to make sure that our needs and our interests are being protected and being met in that medical relationship. So I'm gonna stop there for now. I'm looking forward to this discussion, but I am just gonna read this very brief excerpt from Alison Bechdel's very prolific comic strip that is on point, Dykes to Watch Out For. So I'm going to just share my screen here. Okay, I think that should be working. So don't worry about needing to be able to read the words because I'm going to provide a description. So the strip is called Scary Prospects. And we start the scene, we see two people arriving at a house party and their friend opens the door. Mo, Sydney, happy Halloween. Excellent Hillary costume, Sparrow. Very creepy. Oh, I just got home from work. This is what I wear now that I'm lobbying and fundraising for NARAL all day. A fourth person walks up, dressed in drag, in a UPS costume, heavily mustached. Hey, how come you guys didn't dress up? We see Sydney open her coat and she's got a t-shirt on that says Shop for the Cure and ribbons all over her shirt and ribbon earrings. With a smug look on her face, she says, we did. I'm a victim of the breast cancer industry. So that is Alison Bechtel. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kimiko. And we will continue the conversation, I'm sure, in the question and the exchange period. Thank you very much. And the final presentation will be from Patricia Kearns. Patricia Kearns is a researcher, writer, activist with Breast Cancer Action Quebec. She is a founding member of Montreal's LGBTQ+ film festival, Imagine a Nation, and of the Feminist Digital Arts Center, AdaX, formerly known as Studio XX. She was the lead writer for the National Film Board film Pink Ribbons, Inc., 2011. Her work at BCAQ started when she joined the board of directors in 2009 and left in 2013 to take the job she now holds as research and networking advisor, which combines two of her favorite activities. As a breast cancer patient, Patricia brings a critical understanding of her lived experience to BCAQ. Welcome again, Patricia. The floor is yours. Unmute. You can go. You've unmuted yourself.
Okay. Just going to get back to my document here. Okay. I am so happy to be here tonight. Very happy to have looked over that list of people who are participating tonight, to see so many friendly, known names, members, longtime members, 30 years for this organization. It's quite a big night for us. And I'm very happy to be participating in this discussion with such esteemed colleagues. I want to tell you about an event that I attended while researching the film. And I think the difference between breast cancer activism and pink ribbon culture will become very clear. In 2008, I attended the 5th World Conference on Breast Cancer in Winnipeg. The conference was started in 1997 by Janet Collins, who you saw in the film. She was the woman with the pink hair who said, "Why tell women to go and buy expensive meat? Get the stuff out of the meat." The conference was a feminist conference. The first one was held at Queen's University, and it was held every 3 years after in Canada until 2014. It welcomed delegates from many countries: breast cancer patients, women's health advocates, scientists, doctors, researchers, and activists. Lots of heavy hitters presented over the years. When I was there, I heard Sandra Steingreiber, Tyrone Hayes, Deborah Davis. On arriving in Winnipeg on June 4th, I picked up a copy of the major Manitoba daily, the Winnipeg Free Press. To coincide with the opening of the conference, the newspaper was printed entirely in pink, that saccharine shade of pink. Risa, could you bring up the photo? On the front page, below a large pink ribbon, was a photo of a bald woman. Her words said, "I don't want to be sad. I don't want to be miserable. I want to live and be happy. And I am." Thanks, Risa. That's good. So suddenly, everything I had read in Samantha's book hit me in the face. In coining the phrase, the tyranny of cheerfulness, Samantha perfectly described the dominance of the happy narrative in pink ribbon breast cancer culture, how it had been constructed, how it prevailed, and how oppressive it was. And I think these words point to that in a very eerie way. I soon spoke with an oncologist from Vancouver who said that many of her patients did not share the sentiments of hope, optimism, and happiness. Instead, they were sick, they were fearful, and then they felt guilty because they could not join in the Happy Survivors Club. At the conference, I met people who I never will forget. They define activism for me. Lila Springer was one of them. After her own diagnosis and treatment for breast cancer in 1999, Lila knew she had to do something to remedy what was a shocking experience for her. Lila, a woman of African ancestry, did not see herself in any of the printed materials she was given. And believe you me, as breast cancer patients, we are given stacks of stuff to take home. They were all white women, most of them blonde, slim, very stereotypically feminine. Lila immediately recognized a big problem. For example, in the important information about what foods to eat and not eat while going through chemo, she laughed, knowing the suggestions would make little sense to her beloved Caribbean community. So she and Winsome Johnson, also a Black woman, cancer patient, co-founded the Toronto nonprofit, the Olive Branch of Hope, to address the glaring absence. And Lila said that as well as the work they did within the Black community to provide culturally specific information, they also spent a lot of time and energy contacting the mainstream breast cancer organizations to say that their communities also got breast cancer. Their communities were important and needed to be recognized. 20 years later, the Olive Branch of Hope is still going strong. In 2015, a renowned molecular biologist at McMaster University, Juliet Daniel, also of African descent, whose research focuses on triple-negative breast cancer, TNBC, an aggressive and often fatal form of cancer that we've heard about, and it disproportionately strikes Black women. So she partnered with Springer, and together with Daniel's students, they developed initiatives and workshops aimed at raising awareness of TNBC in the Black community. In 2020, they received McMaster's President's Award for Community Engaged Research, and their workshop series, Think Beyond Love Pink, is very popular. That is what activism looks like. Meeting Laura Larson was also powerful. Lorna's daughter, Shanna, in her early 20s, had experienced severe bone pain for several months. She was misdiagnosed with a common condition, sent home, and assured that she would be fine. After her symptoms continued and her health declined, her mother requested further testing. So after rounds of appointments of tests, an abnormal liver function finally alerted the doctor to something more serious. By the time she was properly diagnosed, her cancer had metastasized to her bones and her liver, and Shanna died of breast cancer when she was 24, only 4 months after her correct diagnosis was made. Her mother, along with some of Shanna's good friends, started a nonprofit organization called Team Shan, and it's still raising awareness amongst young women and health professionals. Their tagline is, breast cancer is not just a disease of older women. That is what activism looks like. Two other people I met at the conference have shaped my own activism in important ways, Jim Brophy and Margaret Keith, who you saw in the film. Those people who have done groundbreaking research with agricultural and industrial workers that shows elevated risk for breast cancer in the plastic industries and farming. We have had meaningful collaborations with Breast Cancer Action since our meeting in 2008. And I could go on about their recent work, but I won't right now. Also at the conference were two very special people, Dina Appel and Carol Sector, two members of BCAQ's board at the time. And really the rest is history. So challenging the system when we see the problems it creates is what activism is. It's what we do at Breast Cancer Action Quebec. Whether it's joining a successful campaign for cosmetic labeling laws, which we were part of. In 2006, those laws came into existence. It's not that long. You can now see what the ingredients are. Or challenging the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, our large act which governs all kinds of stuff about the environment. We're engaged in doing work that really matters. So please join our movement, sign up for our newsletter if you haven't, and you can find it on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Yes, thank you again, Sharima, Samantha, Kimiko, and Patricia. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Okay,
Great.
That's what we'd like to hear. So there will be a period of question. I remind the audience that you can put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be getting to as many of them as we can. But before we open the door to you, Jennifer and I have a few questions for the panelists. I would like to start. Sharima, and I will be echoing a bit of what Patricia said when she talked about that Black woman in her presentation. So Sharima, you have said that the research on breast cancer and Black women is very alarming, to say the very least. We would like to know, when did you start seeing these trends emerge? Also, if you can tell us more about what is known and what is not known. You talked about it a bit, but maybe recap for us. And do you have any information on this situation in Canada? And maybe on that point, Jennifer, you could jump in if possible. So Sharima?
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, so a lot of people seem to think that breast cancer is a disease of white women, or they used to think this. And it is true that estrogen receptor positive breast cancer is very common in white women. But when you look at the incident rates certainly in the US, where there is a lot of information on different ethnicities, while white women used to have the highest incident rates, that has not been the case since around 2012, when unfortunately the incident rates in Black women caught up with that in white women in the US. And in fact, so since 2012, it's been around the same. And in fact, younger Black women under 44 have a higher risk of breast cancer than younger white women, women in the same age range in the US again. What is tragic is they have a much higher probability of dying of the disease. So the mortality rate in Black women in the US is 31%, which is higher than any ethnicity in the US. And there could be a variety of reasons for this, one of which is racism and lack of access to care and not being treated quickly enough. But also they have an elevated risk of triple negative breast cancer, which we've talked about already, which is a far more aggressive form of the disease with less treatment modalities or successful treatment modalities for it. When it comes to Canada, I really haven't been able to find data that is broken out for Black Canadian women, which is shocking. You see very similar statistics in the UK for Black women in the UK as in the US, but Jennifer, I don't know if you can shed light a little bit on this, but I haven't found that.
You didn't find it because it's not there. It's a major problem in Canada that we don't collect race-based data on health or on almost any other social issue. And there are researchers in Canada, I can put the link up in the chat, who are calling, and this is a problem, researchers who are working on breast cancer here who think that based on the US studies, but also on the studies out of the UK, and also in the studies when you compare, comparing Black women with white women, those studies are very carefully controlled to try and match socioeconomic status and access to healthcare as precisely as possible. And yeah, excellent. So someone put it up. And so the researchers here feeling that we have every reason to suspect that we have as alarming trends in Canada, but we don't know. We know nothing, and that the lack of race-based data is a huge health injustice, finally, and that we need to be collecting this. But they are as alarmed by this research coming out of the UK and the US, and yet they can't. They don't have the data to be able to really dive into it to understand what we should be doing here. So it's a real problem, and it's a very interesting. Or just from the U of T, there's researchers outlining the problem in the chat. You could see that. So yeah, it's
Thank
it's a big
you,
question.
thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Sharima. Jennifer, you can leave your mic open because I would give you the opportunity to ask your first question.
Sure. Well, maybe to Samantha and Kimiko, but. Really anyone can jump in on this, and it's something that really that I wonder about a lot, and it's that breast cancer is a biological fact for anyone with breasts, and if those breasts have matured, which is the case of anybody with ovaries, the risk of breast cancer is significant. But it's an organ. Granted, it's a highly sexualized organ in Western culture, but I don't, I don't understand how such heterosexual cisnormative culture has developed around what is a biological fact. It's a quarter of cancers diagnosed in women and people with ovaries are breast cancer. 3/4 are another kind of cancer. And in fact, lung cancer and colon cancer add up to as many breast cancer diagnoses, but you don't see this in other cancers. So how did this strange culture build, and why? What purpose does it serve? That's my question.
Maybe I'll give the short answer, and I'll let Samantha King
Sure.
eloquently elaborate with the more academic answer. Patriarchy. I mean, I think this might have been in the film too, but you know, one theory was around you know, people like to say the word breast, right, in North America, and there's even though we're actually talking, you know, in some cases about chopping off breasts, like you get to say breast in public, you know, regularly. So I think, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if that is also a contributing factor. But Samantha King, maybe you want to elaborate there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And one of the things I always say is that it didn't have to turn out this way, right? I mean, it was produced and curated in the way that it is, in the way that reinforces in really problematic ways conventional gender norms and exclusionary ways. And so, I mean, I think it, you know, it does have to do in part with the things Kimiko already mentioned, you know, the link to sexuality, to motherhood, all of those things, but those are also contrived, right? And I think the involvement of the cosmetics industry so early on too, as a major sponsor, you know, Estee Lauder and then Self Magazine, and in the very early days when Nancy Brinker, the CEO of the Komen Foundation in the States, was seeking out corporate partners, because that is how she thought the struggle against breast cancer would be won. She went after those partnerships, and I think it sort of kind of took on a life of its own. But there was, I think, once that happened, there was in some ways, I mean, there was no going back. It was that those connections were solidified to, you know, problematic beauty culture and all of those things very early on as well.
I should add, it's also exceedingly white.
Oh yeah.
I mean, astoundingly white.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just because it's a consumer base of the corporations that are using the whole movement and embarking on this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. And as I can't remember who it was who said that, maybe it was Sharima, that you know, this there's this idea that still, you know, persists about breast cancer as a white women's disease, and there was just very little effort to challenge that. And even when there was, it was sort of, you know, in terms of diversifying the demographics to which corporations could sell products, right? I mean, that's kind of in the pink ribbon movement anyway. That's what happened. I think in terms of any challenges to that, and really, I mean, both in Canada and in the US, very little effort to or interest in talking about racism, right, in biomedicine or in research or in philanthropic culture. I mean, that just wasn't, I think, I think people didn't think that would sell, right? And so then the system just perpetuates itself.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kimiko,
I was just going to briefly
yes, Kimiko. Yes.
I mean, I think, and Samantha, you were getting this at the end, but if cause-based marketing it's really to improve their bottom line more than it is about the cause, then, you know, the traditional thinking, well, if you want to sell a product, you know, you put white people in the advertisement, right? You know, now we're slowly starting to see, you know, first it was mixed race, the people in advertisements. Now maybe we're getting to see some more darker skinned people. But I think that same idea applies to this, you know, cause-based marketing. You know, they're thinking about that bottom line. And so I think that's why we also see this really white approach to the pink ribbon culture.
Thank you, Kimiko. Patricia, maybe you have a thought you would like to share with us on that topic, but a more specific question for you. Being a breast cancer prevention activist implies being part of a social movement. what social movement do you consider your work as being part of? And can you describe the major goals and values of that movement?
Sure. Well, I am a feminist. I've been part of the feminist movement for many years. I began in fighting violence against women and promoting social justice for women. And today, intersectional feminism provides a framework that includes marginalized voices, and that's where I situate myself. Social movements sometimes converge and morph and always challenge the system. So the breast cancer activism movement, let's say of the 90s, included environmental activism. The women's health movement and the patient advocacy movement, of which I've also been part of as a patient partner in research, giving voice to ourselves as patients, we're part of the feminist movement. And today our work intersects with the environmental justice movement. So we're part of a broad progressive movement whose goals are largely to make sure that there is an environment, healthy environment that all can share in. So, having equal access to clean water and clean air and protection from environmental harm. And as a breast cancer organization, our work focuses on preventing breast cancer as much as we can. We know some breast cancer is going to happen for genetic reasons, etc. But really the work that we're doing is looking at removing the risk of elevated breast cancer risk. So all of the toxic chemicals that Sharima talked to us about in the presentation, we work on really wanting to get those out of society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And
Yeah.
since you mentioned Sharima, I have a question for you. Where is it? I'm sorry. So speaking about all those chemicals and stuff, Sharima, why are we exposed to these chemicals that cause so much harm? And why are they allowed to be used? And is this the same situation in Canada? And there again, I think Jennifer will ask you to jump in.
Yeah, I think slightly better in Canada, actually. So no, all right, not even a little bit. But here in the US, basically, when you're talking about cosmetics, the entire cosmetics industry in the US is regulated by 2 pages of law that was written, I believe, in the 40s. And it hasn't been amended since. So the Food and Drug Administration in the US has no authority to ask companies to test cosmetics for safety before they're put on the shelves, has no authority to recall cosmetics because of safety issues. They can request a voluntary recall, but they can't actually take toxic chemical cosmetics off the shelf. And they allow, though we do have cosmetics labeling for ingredients, you don't have to label the ingredients in fragrance, and that can cover dozens, if not more, chemicals, many of which are designed to be hormonally active because they're pheromones and things like that. So it has been a failure of legislation to protect public health. And then with other chemicals, I mean, we have the Toxic Substances Control Act, which was finally amended in 2016, but they still haven't gone through even the first 10 chemicals that they were meant to check for safety after the 2016 Act. So it really has been a failure of safety regulation by the government in the US. And that's something that we and other environmental health organizations, as you said, that intersection between environmental health and breast cancer have been working on for many years in the US and continue to push for. And one of the bright spots is that in certain states in the US, because it is a federal system, with states that have quite a lot of autonomy, we've been able to push for laws in California, especially, which is a very progressive state. So we have a law now that fragrance ingredients that are harmful should be disclosed to anybody who buys a product in California, and that can affect not only the rest of the US, but it can affect North America, because a lot of these products that are sold in California are also sold elsewhere. And if they're sold online in California, they have to disclose fragrance fragrance ingredients. So that's how we have been pushing it for many years, is trying to change the laws in the more progressive states and try and get that to affect national law as well. But we do work in DC as well, but it takes a long time to get anything done in DC.
Thank you, Sharima.
Yeah,
Jennifer, what
thank
about
you.
Canada?
Canada, that was very interesting, Sharima. We have different regulatory systems, but very similar problems. So in Canada, as anyone who's a member here certainly knows, it's the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that regulates toxic substances. It's a huge act, as Trish said, regulates many. It's a pollution control act, so that's meant to serve to protect the environment and human health. So it regulates air quality, fuel emissions, dumping at sea, hazardous waste. It's very large. Part 5, really big section, regulation of toxic substances, major weaknesses and big loopholes, and it's very problematic. The environmental and health groups have been pushing for a reform of the act for many years. And in the spring, what many people don't know is that there was actually reform tabled by the government, Bill C-28. It was kind of borderline acceptable in terms of what it represented in terms of advances. It's one of those things where you disappointed that there wasn't more in the bill, but at the same time many groups felt that it could be improved in committee when it goes through the process of study and amendments at what's called the Envy Committee, but it fell when elections were called. So, but we got a view at any rate of what the federal government had in mind in terms of what SEPA reform represents for them. And so what now groups are fighting for is a much improved version, an improved version of the bill to be tabled quickly, because we're in a minority government, and minority governments have very short lifespans, and it needs about maybe a little less than 2 years to be able to get it through all the stages it needs to go through to be adopted. And so that's where we are. We will keep you posted on all information on what's coming down in terms of when a bill is tabled, what it contains, how our interpretation of it, and we might have to mobilize at different points, maybe in January, maybe at other times, to really tell the government that we want a good reform of this law. But we have as many problems as they have in the States. And it's really interesting. California is always ahead of everybody else. And even in Canada, we look to California and hope that they get the most progressive laws, and that it just by the sheer market power that they have, that we get better cosmetics because they have to conform to the Californian laws. So yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So Viorica tells me that we have a few questions from the audience. So I will now hand the virtual mic to Viorica Rodchenkova, who will read the questions from the public.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Viorica.
Thank you, Maggie. There is a question from Judith. Judith is asking, are there any changes that have to be advocated for at the international level regarding how toxic chemicals are evaluated and approved to be used at certain concentrations? Health Canada often says that they meet international standards when approving the use of toxic chemicals, and it is a difficult argument to counter. I'm thinking of such things as the cumulative effect of exposure to multiple chemicals at the same time, etc.
Thank you. Who
That's
would like to take that, Jennifer?
I can wade in first, but Sharima would also have might have some interesting an interesting perspective on this. What Health Canada does is it looks at all of the research literally around the globe on a specific toxic substance. When it we regulate chemicals substance by substance, which is another problem with the act. One of the significant advance is that in the reform that was proposed, that there would be a recognition of cumulative effects, and cumulative effects is a very broad category in terms of what that represents. That's a very important move forward. But international standards, really, it's kind of like saying, what is it, organic that has no official, or natural, no, it's natural. Like to say that it's natural, it has no official definition anywhere. International standards really don't mean anything because there is no one body that any kind of higher authority on what constitute toxic substances and how they should be regulated. So that doesn't get us any further. It just means that they've consulted a very large body of literature on the effects of that substance, and are kind of weighing their response in relation to what other jurisdictions have done. I don't know, Sharima, if you have a different.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get people to look at mixtures and cumulative effects of exposure, because we're not exposed to one chemical at a time. Right. We're exposed to mixtures of chemicals that have multiple effects. And that is something that certainly on the research side, the US government is funding research to look into mixtures, but on the regulatory side, they're not there yet. They really aren't. And the US regulators like to do their own thing. They don't normally look at what's happening abroad, but they do take part in some of the OECD testing regulations and stuff. And that is somewhere that we've worked a little bit to try. So for a long time, mammary gland, when I mean, we're trying to reduce all rodent tests and things, but for a long time, when they did a toxicity test in rodents, they just threw the mammary glands away. They didn't look at the mammary glands. So, I mean, how can you tell what the effect is of a chemical that you're testing on mammalian mammary tissue if you just if you don't even look at it? So that was one of the things that we pushed for a few years back, and got that in to get that in at the international level to be this is a standard kind of test, though we are. But actually talking about reducing animal tests, some of these high throughput tests, which are cell-based tests, are actually a really great way that we can maybe test for multiple chemicals at the same time, because you can run it through some of these in vitro cell-based assays with multiple chemicals and see a result that you wouldn't ever be able to do with animals, even if you thought that was appropriate. I'm really happy to see some of the science that's being done, but unfortunately it hasn't yet got into the regulators. So yeah.
Thank you. Eureka, I believe we have another question. And just before you ask the question, I would like to tell Samantha that maybe after the question period, you can finish your presentation, because I believe you had a few words left for us. That's okay? Okay, Eureka, can you please ask the next question?
The question is from Jane. Jane is saying, as has been so eloquently addressed in tonight's presentations, the problem of breast cancer is also a problem of our cultural ecosystem of patriarchy, racism, gender norms, toxic exposures, consumerism, weak legislation. Can we address these problems in each of their parts, or do we need to go deeper at the level of values, ideology, and political economy?
Everybody's pretty happy about this question. So who wants to jump in first? Okay, Kimiko, I saw you clapping to that. Did you want to?
No, I was just saying it's just a small question. No, I mean, I would just say, I think, and Patricia mentioned the importance of intersectional feminism. I think, our approach to tackling these issues has to be intersectional, not only kind of within feminism, but across movements. You can't look at things in isolation. And that's often a problem, like racism in the gay movement, right? When you start isolating things, then, you create other bigger issues. So I think it really does have to be a very holistic approach to how we respond to these things.
Thank you. Anybody else wanted to weigh in?
Something thank you. There was something I had been thinking about in preparing for this and thinking about what has changed and how did those changes come about, let's say, in the last 10 years. And I realized that, yes, we do hear now about Black women and breast cancer and what has happened with the studies and looking at triple negative breast cancer and finding ways of dealing with that, the treatments. We have started to hear more about young women and breast cancer, and all of these changes that have come. Also, for example, the women with metastatic breast cancer. 10 years ago, we didn't really hear a lot about that. But all of those changes have come from the people within those groups. So I think the question asked, do we break this down or do we look at the larger picture of values? I think often what happens is that activism from different pressure points, from different communities, comes and pushes things forward. I think we're in a period right now where there is a lot of change, where I read an interesting thing, we need existential creatives, as somebody in The Guardian called them, to say, like, we're really in a serious situation right now. The planet is on fire. We are in a toxic soup. How are we going to change things? I think it's every group that is concerned will find their movements and their pushes, and then the larger values and ideas that we want to uphold, hopefully we will find the way to bring this all together.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have 10 minutes left before we take a break and then go to the party. So, Viorica, is there any other question?
No more questions.
No more questions. Okay, so Samantha, over to you. Because I'm sorry I had to interrupt your presentation, so maybe we could.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry I went over my time. I was just really in preparation for tonight. I had done a little bit of research on what was happening in the breast cancer charity section and reading up on kind of the fallout of the Canadian Cancer Society's decision to basically buy up the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation in 2017. So what happened was the Canadian Cancer Society was facing a huge deficit, and the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation's fortunes were also waning for a variety of reasons that I mentioned. But they had ready cash. They had 28 million in fund balances, and they had raised 17 million from the Run for the Cure that year. And so the Canadian Cancer Society merged with the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation and that helped pay down their deficit. And then in 2020, that bigger organization merged with Prostate Cancer Canada. And this series of transactions has been heralded in some quarters as bringing greater efficiency. But I prefer to think about it as heralding a monopolized cancer sector, where the big foundations are battling for market share, buying up their competitors and their brands, in a way that makes the cause really tangential. It's kind of incredible to read the reports of these mergers, and you don't see anything really about cancer research, certainly not cancer prevention, but almost nothing. I mean, we're really just talking about business transactions here. And indeed, consolidation has not addressed the Canadian Cancer Society's colossal overhead spending. Charity Intelligence Canada, which is an organization you may be familiar with, they track charities in Canada, and the Canadian Cancer Society has failed to meet their reasonable overhead spending criteria since they've been tracking it, since 2013. And in 2021, so this is after they bought out the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation and Prostate Cancer Society, their overhead was 45%, meaning that for every dollar spent, just 55 cents went to the cause. So, you know, and so that's one thing, and that's about fundraising ethics, and it's really problematic. But I mean, I think, you know, beyond that, the kinds of things we're thinking about here is, of course, or alongside that, there's no sense that these organizations are ever going to reorientate their agenda towards systemic change, or the kinds of questions we're addressing tonight. And I guess I'll just finish by saying one of the things when I teach this in my courses, it's really hard for my students to think about responding to breast cancer through anything other than charity or raising money. That is where they go for the most part. And so I see my role as trying to open their eyes to more political responses to change and to social movements. And there's been little shifts in that, I think, in the last few years in hopeful directions. But it remains a struggle. And I think that really speaks to how deeply ingrained in our subjectivities this kind of depoliticized, raise money and the problem will go away approach has become.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you very much. So Eureka tells us that we have 2 more questions. We have 5 minutes. So what I would ask you, Eureka, is to read the questions and we'll see if we can answer them in 3 minutes.
Thank you, Maggie. The question is from Jim Brothy and Margaret Keith. Thank you very much for being here. What is the impact of social class in terms of risk, and how can the voices of working class women be amplified? That was the question from Jim Brothy. And the question from Jocelyn Cooper: we're canvassed by hospitals, by organizations such as Prostate Cancer, and of course from Canadian Cancer Society. Are any of these more worthy of the public's money?
Thank you, Eureka, for this question. Okay, who can answer those? You have 1 minute each to answer. Well, 1 minute for each answer. Is that feasible?
So on raising the voices of working class women and workers in general, yeah, it's imperative because workers, especially, and Jim and you guys have done the research on some of this, but like that workers really do face the brunt of higher exposures through their workplaces and chemicals they have to work with. Or I know you've done some great research on the bridge toll workers in Ontario and their exposures to diesel. What we've done at BCPP, what I'm currently doing is we've been trying to work more with unions and there aren't many in the US, but with those that exist, to try and talk with groups of workers, try and measure exposures to breast carcinogens and endocrine disruptors linked to breast cancer, and try and figure out what's the best way of mitigating those exposures without affecting their right and ability to work. It's very important. I mean, people need to do these jobs. It's just how do we mitigate the exposures they may be exposed to and enable them to work in the most healthy environments possible. So yes, BCPP, if you read our Path to Prevention document, we're very supportive of worker organizing and unions. Unfortunately, that is very difficult in the US, but it is something that I think it's allowing workers to organize and get the information they need and be able to advocate for themselves.
Thank you, Sharima. For the next question, who is worthy? What? So we are canvassed by hospitals, organization, of course, from Canadian Cancer Society, or any of these more worthy of the public's money?
It's funny because I've got a page in my book where I feel like a different relationship now to cancer fundraising. I see, I'm like, oh, it's for me. So yeah, I've got this scene where, there's somebody trying to fundraise money for cancer. And I'm like, oh, it's okay, I'll take this. And I walk it over and deposit it to the migrant worker organizing that's happening across the street. A bit of a cheeky response, but I do feel like cancer has a lot of money and there are so many important causes that don't get enough money. And I think the fact that cancer, it's seen as you can throw money in it and we'll solve it. You don't have to get into messy issues, into politics, into questions of racism and that, people think that. And so I would think about other causes aside from cancer, but also within cancer to think about, who's doing it differently. So, Breast Cancer Action Quebec, or, Patricia mentioned a couple different organizations that are specifically looking at, for Black women or for young people, so don't go for the monolith organization, especially if, there's 45% overhead, as Professor King said. Look at the organizations that have a more politicized approach and that, probably there's going to be a much more tangible benefit to your money than one of the bigger organizations.
Thank you, Kimiko. And since I will invite you to leave your mic open because we will conclude this segment since you have kindly accepted to read the afterword of your book for us. So I remind everyone the wonderful book is titled Kimiko Does Cancer, published by Arsenal Pulp Press and illustrated by Keith Ganiza. And you dedicate it, I quote, to our fellow sick queers, end of quote. And now over to you for your afterword.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, it's illustrated by Keith Ganiza, who is a fantastic illustrator, did an amazing job. I can only draw stick figures, so that wasn't going to work.
Could you show us the copy? I'm sorry, could you just show us the front page? Right. Okay. Wonderful.
So
yes, thank you.
They've put this little illustration of me in a hospital gown on my bike because I would bike to my radiation appointments. Okay. So this is the afterword. I'm not a big fan of the common sentiment, cancer made me a better person. I guess I tend to think that it shouldn't take a near-death experience to kickstart the desire to be a good person, to have balanced priorities, to live with passion, to be empathetic. But then cancer did make me a better person, or at least cancer triggered several practical changes that made me a better person. For one, cancer led me to therapy, and therapy changed so much of how I relate to people, process emotions, and plan my life. Cancer was also the impetus for reducing my work week to 4 days, a change that opened up time for me to focus on myself. And of course, cancer put me on this path to writing this book. And this book, among many other changes, encouraged exploratory conversations with my family and helped me find a creativity I didn't know was there. So yes, cancer shook things up, but you won't find me living every day as if it's my last. That just seems exhausting. Plus, what would happen to the revolution if we all operated that way? I recognize, though, that I'm very lucky to likely have many more days left to live, and I hope to use those days wisely most of the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kimiko. So that was the afterword from Kimiko's book, Kimiko Does Cancer. Now, yes, so this concludes again. Thank you, Patricia Kearns, Samantha King, Sharima Rasanayagam, Kimiko Tobimatsu. Thank you so much for having, for those, it was so enlightening, empowering. Thank you for your comments, your words, your remarks. Thank you to everybody who was in the audience. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Jennifer, for having chosen me to moderate this fantastic conversation. And for the public, the chat is now open for your comments. And I now invite Jennifer Beeman for the closing remarks.
Well, Maggie, you thanked everyone who I also wanted to thank, but I can do it again. Sharima, Samantha, Kimiko, and Trish, that was an amazing discussion, and you have left us brimming with new ideas and new perspectives on so many issues. And Maggie, as always, you do more than moderate. You helped create a very memorable evening for us. And we are so lucky to have a network of professional translators and interpreters who volunteer their professional skills to us. And so it was so important for us. It's so important for us in general. And tonight we give a huge thanks to Najet Glenza and Bernadette Blaine for their work for this important discussion. And I listened to part of the discussion in French. And because French takes a few more words, they really had to work to do the job they did. And they did an excellent job. Thank you so much, you two. Risa Levine always helps us with our technical support, and it's such a pleasure to work with you, and thank goodness, because we would feel like we were on a tightrope wire if we did this by ourselves. So thank you so much, Risa. My colleagues, Emma Maria, Catherine, Vio, Trish, they have been working on this evening from the start, and you did a fantastic job. They took it in hand because I was a bit overloaded, and thank you so much. You are amazing colleagues. Breast Cancer Action has a fantastic board made up of women who are really committed to this organization. And so we thank all the board members. This is a collective enterprise. It's everyone's contribution that makes this happen. So if you're not a member, you should become one. If you can make a donation to allow us to continue our work, that's great too. But if you want to, you can just sign up for our newsletter and stay and become more familiar with our work and support some of our mobilizations from time to time. We need everyone in every way that they can participate. So we are so happy that you joined us for this, and we invite you to stay for a toast to Breast Cancer Action Quebec for our 30 years. We'll do that at 8:45, and then after that we have a jazz concert with Laura Anglade. So we invite you to get up, stretch, but come back at 8:45 for a toast to this organization that has been the work of so many people and just continues to try and push things forward and in the right way with very little overhead, by the way. So thank you very much.